Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are joined again today by Scott Ritter, a former U.S. Marine, a major, and a UN weapons inspector. So, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, Trump was expected to withdraw the U.S. from the Ukraine war and also improve bilateral ties with Russia. Indeed, it looked as if he was on the path to doing this, but not only now has Trump made this his own war, but bilateral relations are also seemingly going from bad to worse. And one of these things which you have picked up in an article is the language, which is the rhetoric, which is heating up. That is some strong words from Trump against Putin. Putin hasn't really responded, but now we see the former Russian president Dmitry Medvedev and President Trump exchanging some not very subtle threats, which includes reference to nuclear weapons. Again, you wrote an article with the title Trump and Medvedev's Dangerous Exchange of Words. I was wondering if you can elaborate what words have been exchanged, and also what is the significance of this?
I'm not a diplomat. I'm a former Marine, and I'm not known for being much of a wordsmith, pretty direct speaker. But when I was with the United Nations, a very experienced Russian diplomat kept pressing on me the importance of words. He said, "Words matter. When you use a word, the language, the meaning, it's all important." And that seems to be reflective of all Russians, not just him. That when the Russians use words, they matter. The language matters, and I bring that up because we this exchange that took place between Donald Trump and Dmitry Medvedev. Sometimes people they have a tendency to say, it's just the internet. It's just social media posting. There's the term S posting, S being a bad word, so I won't use it. But so don't read too much into it, except that one of the participants is a former Russian president, and words matter. Um, President Trump posted on his Truth Social media platform a post that was sort of critical of both Russia and India and mocking. Basically, I think Trump is coming face to face with the reality that the threats that he's put on against Russia are having zero impact. Um, Even Lindsey Graham, who has been one of Trump's dominant advisors when it comes to how to put pressure um, on Russia, acknowledges that Russia is pretty much sanction proof. That Russia has made itself immune to the impact of U.S. sanctions. And the president has come to a similar conclusion. He said these may not work against Russia. But the idea was to do secondary sanctions against the people who bought Russian oil. Um, well, China's just not playing that game. India, has always been sort of sitting on the fence, but it doesn't appear that India is going to 100% buy in. There is some talk that India is looking at additional sources, but the Indians, aren't giving the United States the result that they wanted, and so President Trump has mocked the dead economies of both Russia and India, indicating that if they continue to operate in this fashion, that they won't have business with the United States, and the United States will conspire to kill their economies. And he then went on to caution Dmitry Medvedev, who's been critical of Trump's threats over the last couple days, weeks, to say, you're entering very dangerous grounds. Well, what does that mean, dangerous grounds? I think here we get an insight into, how much the Russians follow Donald Trump and follow the United States and follow our policy formulations. We have a president who has openly embraced the concept of regime change, decapitation strikes through military action in Iran. He has talked about how, he could have targeted the Iranian president, the Iranian supreme leader. He praised early on the Israeli efforts to achieve this decapitation. Um, and the Israelis, in designing their Iranian attack, made reference to, the Nasrallah effect, meaning their assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the um, the head of Hezbollah, combined with this pager attack against Hezbollah intermediate leadership. The combined effect was to collapse Hezbollah's political sustainability and led to Hezbollah withdrawing from the conflict against Israel. Netanyahu, in talking about the Iranian action, made reference to the Nasrallah effect, saying that we're doing the same thing early on. Um, Now, what does this have to do with the President of the United States? We're looking at the reality. There's a couple things the American people need to come to grips with. One, that the notion that this president was seeking the bettering of relations with Russia is an absolute fallacy. The president has never been seeking better relations with Russia. The president has been seeking relations defined by American supremacy over Russia, American superiority over Russia. That what the president wants isn't to treat Russia as an equal, but to treat Russia as subservient. That the betterment of relations is contingent upon Russia yielding to American demands about Ukraine, yielding to American economic imperatives. We've seen the president lash out against BRICS and the supposed de-dollarization taking place in BRICS. Um, this is all indicative of the fact that what the president wants is a Russia that recognizes American supremacy. And that's not the Russia he's confronted with. Russia that he's confronted with is the exact opposite. A Russia that is presenting America with Russian supremacy, especially when it comes to the issue of Ukraine, that Russia will do whatever it wants in Ukraine. There's nothing the Americans can do to stop them. Um, I think you're also looking at the fact that Russia is largely immune to American economic pressures and that the American military isn't up to the task of dealing with the Russians. This is something that I think has come crashing home to Trump. And so what happens is I believe that Trump becomes very vulnerable to arguments that say, we don't have to match the Russians conventionally. We have nuclear supremacy, and that if needed, we could just take the Russian leadership out, collapse the Russian intermediate leadership, and lead to the collapse of Russia as a whole. The Nasrallah effect applied to Russia writ large. Um, this dates back to thinking that existed in the 1980s during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, where talk was given about launching a decapitation strike using Trident missiles launched from Ohio-class submarines, Pershing II missiles based out of West Germany, B-52s armed with air-launched cruise missiles. The combined impact of all these would be that within 12 to 15 minutes of launch, Russian leadership would be eliminated, and the majority of Russia's strategic ability to hit the United States would be eliminated. The belief then is that the Russians would back down, confronted with, the real likelihood of their total destruction if they continue the conflict. Fortunately, that never happened. One of the reasons why that didn't happen is that Russia put in play a concept known as the dead hand or the perimeter system. A lot of people think that it's fake. It's not fake. I know it's not fake because when I was a weapons inspector in Votkinsk, we came face to face with the modified SS-25s that were used as part of the perimeter system. Instead of having warheads on top, they would have a sophisticated communications module. They would broadcast the launch codes so that if the Russian leadership was taken out, all of Russia's surviving nuclear weapons will be launched against the United States automatically. That's why it's called the dead hand, meaning you may have killed them, but the dead hand is going to launch the missiles. Medvedev alluded to the dead hand. He said, "What are you talking about? Dangerous grounds. Are you threatening us?" And he said, well, you might want to take a look at The Walking Dead. That's a TV series about sort of a zombie apocalyptic world where everything, society has been largely destroyed and people are running around survivors. Um, And he mentioned the dead hand. Now, he said the dead hand, which doesn't exist because Russia hasn't officially acknowledged the existence of the dead hand, but it does exist. Words matter. Dmitry Medvedev made this statement for a reason. He's letting the president know that the fantasy that exists in his head, the fantasies that's being sold by his advisors, is just that, a fantasy. And the consequences of seeking to act on this fantasy by threatening Russia will be apocalyptic in nature.
Yeah, the dead hand comment kind of stood out as yeah, to show how serious the situation is. But do the Russians think they or have a reasonable concern that the U.S. could be planning such a decapitation strike, or is it likely? Because I think many looked with some concern when the United States attacked Iran in the middle of the negotiations. And again, for the Russians, a month earlier, or 2 weeks or something, they had also this attack on their own nuclear deterrent, in which it was a bit ambiguous to what extent Trump would have been aware of this. Again, there were similarities with the tactics of importing drones, and do you think this is something they are concerned about and preparing? Because uh, I mean, the sweeter the tone from Trump, at the same time he tends to be a bit deceptive. So at least the trust is very much gone now. But do you see this uh, as a possible thought that Trump now has, this decapitation strike?
I see it as a positive because there are no other alternatives if you're going to be trying to bully Russia. What are you bullying Russia with? Your conventional military power? It's non existent. Um, your ability to uh, sustain Ukraine as a viable proxy to wear down Russia? Not happening. Your ability to economically strangle Russia? Not happening. So if you've built a policy formulation that is dependent upon Russia bending the knee, the only thing left is to intimidate Russia using the threat of nuclear war. And I believe that that is what this president is doing. And I believe the Russians are fully cognizant of this. And Dmitry Medvedev's response on X, the citation of the dead hand, is proof positive. He's not going to make that mention out of the blue. Words matter. And so for the former president who is cognizant of what the dead hand is to mention it means that he's basically been cleared to put the president of the United States on notice that don't even think about it. We will knock the living daylights out of you. You may kill us, but we'll kill you too. And all that will be left is a Walking Dead type scenario.
Well, all of this, heated rhetoric is, of course, in the context of the United States or Trump putting a new deadline on the Russians. That is, warning Russia it had to end the war within 50 days, which was then adjusted down to 10 days. And it kind of begs the question, what happens in 10 days? Because there's only three possible options. One is further sanctions, but as you said, it's very limited impact this is going to have, and it could make Trump look weak. The second would be to send more weapons, but how much more weapons could be sent? And the third would be something more direct, such as what people like Lindsey Graham might like, or something like a decapitation strike. But how is Russia reacting to this though? This 10 days, besides the outbursts from President Medvedev.
Well, last night we saw a very heavy strike against Kiev that made use of not only of the Giron drones, but according to some reports, 13 Iskander M's were fired against a single target in Kiev. That's escalation, not de-escalation. I think what the Russians are saying is we could care less about what you're saying. We are going to do what we need to do to win this war on our terms, and you can be damned. It's pretty much the Russian response. I don't think the Russians are going to engage meaningfully with Donald Trump on these issues. What can Trump do? I mean, he already recognizes his policy is going to fail. So And the legislation being pushed through the Senate isn't 500% tariffs as Lindsey Graham was demanding. It's the ability to go from 0 to 500, 0, which means the president has the latitude to do nothing. And so what I see is that the president, hasn't committed to a specific number or any number against Russia. Um, I think he's hopeful that the Russians will respond by saying, "Oh no, we don't want these secondary sanctions. We'll let's get back to the negotiating table." I can't predict the future, but I don't imagine the Russians are going to yield on this issue. I don't imagine the Russians. I don't imagine the Chinese or the Brazilians yielding. The Indians, we never know. Um, but I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump has to be careful about boxing himself into a corner here. An over reliance upon failed policy only invites total failure. So I think, once again, Trump will get into the business of extensions, et cetera. I don't think we're ready for war just yet. But the fact is, as you pointed out, when confronted with absolute failure on all other fronts, does the president admit failure or does he seek so-called victory by uh, promoting a scenario that he's been told could lead to an American victory?
I always make the point to people in the West that one of the things that has annoyed Russia the most over the past 30 years, something that, by the way, Sergei Lavrov keeps mentioning, at least over the past 20 years, with many times, has been the death of diplomacy. And throughout the years, he's made the same comment many times, which is that we no longer, all after the Cold War, we stopped sitting down talking about competing security concerns, looking for compromise and solutions. Instead, he always argues that after the Cold War, the West abandoned diplomacy in return for a language of ultimatums and threats. This is what Lavrov always says, and this is something that they will never accept. Again, many times has made this comment. And so yet again, here it is, this language of ultimatums, which is end the war, 10 days, or you'll get your punishment. Ambiguous what this means. But the whole thing is kind of strange, because if you want to end the war, it shouldn't it have a component with the United States and Russia? It's Trump seems to still take himself out of the America out of the equation, as if this is only a conflict between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, I mean, that's unrealistic. Trump wants to make sure that when this war gets finished on terms that he helps negotiate, that he gets full credit for ending the war, but nobody links him to the beginning of the war, that this isn't Donald Trump's war. It very much is his war, especially now when he's made it so directly. Um, Again, the president's boxing himself into a rhetorical corner. He's leaving himself no way out. Uh, what happens when sanctions fail? They will fail. What happens when Russia calls the bluff, which they are already doing? Do you admit failure? Do you admit you're bluffing, or are you trapped? Do you now have to pursue some sort of face-saving gesture? But there is no face-saving gesture. I mean, you heard Christopher Donahue mention a possible, face-saving gesture. An attack against Kaliningrad, as if the Russian exclave there wasn't part of Mother Russia, and Russia wouldn't treat it as part of Mother Russia. Um, I mean, we are literally entering the realm of insanity, where you know political pride is creating the conditions for thermonuclear annihilation.
Well, how do you see the Russophobes that Trump has surrounded himself with as being part of this new influence, this new approach to Russia, or was it always deceptive? Because he during the election, he was making comments that his mistake in the first administration was to have people like Bolton there. He referred to them, I think, as to a bit of an attack dog, so a bad cop to his good cop, perhaps. But but he also seems to be pursuing what they're advocating for. How do you make sense of the team he's putting up around him?
I can't. I mean, it doesn't make any sense from a policy standpoint, or a foreign policy standpoint, or a national security policy standpoint. It does make sense from a domestic standpoint because Russophobia has infected the entire United States. I mean, frankly speaking, we're talking low single digits in terms of the percentages of Americans who actually know anything about Russia and understand the truth about Russia. You can get higher percentages when you say, do you want a nuclear war with Russia? You get a higher percentage of people saying no. But then you follow up the question, is Vladimir Putin evil? Yes. They don't even know who he is. They don't know anything about him. They've just been conditioned, Pavlovian response. Putin evil, Putin bad. And when you have this kind of environment, then it's easy to sell failed policy because most people aren't going to view it as a policy failure because they aren't conditioned to think of U.S.-Russian relations as being peaceful in nature. They're conditioned to think of them being confrontational. So I think we're in very dangerous territory, and something has to be done to change the domestic political imperatives surrounding bad policy on Russia. There needs to be a political cost to be paid by this president before he'll pay attention. Otherwise, we're just going to find ourselves one day waking up to nuclear missiles being launched and wishing we were dead.
My last question is, do you think Trump really understands Russia? Because when he makes these arguments that the Indians and the Russians have a dead economy, the Russians have more losses than the Ukrainians, and the solution to the war apparently is European peacekeepers supervising an unconditional ceasefire. It just it's just a lot of misses, which creates a lot of concern that he doesn't actually understand the conflict.
Well, he doesn't understand the conflict, and he most certainly doesn't understand Russia. He doesn't know Vladimir Putin. He claims to have mastery of all three things, but he knows nothing. And this is the danger. I mean, normally you want somebody who's smart enough to be able to discern that they have insufficient knowledge and therefore try to empower themselves with knowledge and information by seeking out expert advice before moving forward aggressively on complexes fraught with danger as these. But this is what happens when you elect a narcissist, an egomaniac as president of the United States. He believes sincerely that he knows best. I mean, this colors everything he does. He's a classic, sociopath when it comes to, malignant narcissism. But it's a very dangerous situation. There's no easy way to describe this. I can't craft words together that'll make people feel good about this. You should be scared to death because we have a madman as the president of the United States who is creating the conditions in his brain that will legitimize nuclear war against Russia.
So actually, one more final question. And how do you see this war ending now? The peaceful settlement, I guess, is out the window.
This war ends with either a complete Russian victory or global annihilation.
Yeah, well, so yeah, Trump doesn't go for the latter. It's such a disappointment, though. I think so many people threw their weight behind Trump on the promise of ending the forever wars.
I did.
Ending the Ukraine war. I believed in it.
I gave him 100 days.
Yeah.
And I've been taking a lot of heat because they're like, you support him. Well, he's the president of the United States. who doesn't want the president to succeed? Because the president's success generally translates into success for the nation. And who wouldn't want peace with Russia? Who wouldn't want a president promoting peace? But, you know, after 100 days, where you just were confronted, just as we are today, with the reality of this man. Um, and none of the good things that I thought were going to happen are happening. So, nor are they going to happen unless something fundamentally changes. He needs to clean house on his advisors. He needs a whole new slate of advisors. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
It's also concerning that this the aggressive language which he has employed in the domestic politics and kind of got away with it. It doesn't really transfer well to the international politics, not just against Russia, but again the whole spat between the Russian, well, Medvedev and Trump now was. You also see the same now in referencing India, that is very angry with them, and they're being punished for trading with Iran. They're being punished for trading with Russia. The assumption being that if you cut yourself off from all the other major powers, and you'll only be dependent on the one that's actually threatening you and bullying you. It's even the countries who really, like India, really wants to have a close and good relationship with the United States is now being alienated. I think as you say, words matter, and it's shocking that they're being used so lightly. But here we are. So thanks again for your time, and yet again I would very much recommend your Substack and your article. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me.